If I were to ask you to name a comic book property that somewhat satires and critiques the superhero genre, most of you may say The Boys. But what if I were to tell you that there was a superhero property that came out years prior that did the exact same thing, just on a lesser scale and took itself a little bit more seriously? That film was Watchmen. Let's paint a picture. It's 2008, and Iron Man not only put Marvel back on the map, but it also revitalized the comic book industry. But within a year, one director sought to dissect this, but was it the right time? So let's take it back to the 1980s. In 1986, producer Lawrence Gordon secured the rights to Watchmen for 20th Century Fox, with Joel Silver attached as producer. Fox initially approached creator Alan Moore to write a screenplay adaptation, but after Moore declined, the studio hired Sam Hamm. Hamm submitted his first draft on September 9th, 1988, later admitting that condensing a 338-page graphic novel structured with 9 panels per page into a 128-page script was extremely challenging. To make the story more workable for film, Hamm significantly altered the complex ending, replacing it with a simpler resolution centered on an assassination plot and a time paradox. In 1991, with no movement, Fox placed the project in the turnaround, prompting Gordon to move on to Largo International, with Fox still set to distribute the film. Although Largo shut down 3 years later, Fox retained the right to be involved if the project was ever revived. Gordon and Silver then bought the project to Warner Brothers and the parent company of DC Comics, where Terry Gilliam was brought on as director. Dissatisfied with Hamm's handling of the characters, Gilliam recruited Charles McNoll to revise the script. The second draft credited Gilliam, Warren Scarron, and Hamm rather than McGowan, and reintroduced several elements from the original comic, including Rorschach's journal as a voiceover narration, and restored scenes that Hamm had removed. According to Watchmen artist Dave Gibbons, production was planned for Pinewood Studios, where Silver pushed to cast Arnold Schwarzenegger as Dr. Manhattan, but financial issues plagued the project. After both Gilliam's The Adventure of Baron Munchausen and Silver's Die Hard 2 exceeded their budgets, the team was only able to secure $25 million, far below what was needed. This led Gilliam to exit the project, ultimately concluding that Watchmen could not be adapted into a feature film, something that Alan Moore had said previously. He later explained that composing the story into a 2 to 2.5 hour runtime stripped away what made it meaningful. When Warner Brothers dropped the project, Gordon invited Gilliam to direct it independently, but Gilliam declined again, arguing that the material would only work as a 5-hour miniseries. In 2001, Gordon Universal Studios hired David Hayter to write and direct Watchmen under a lucrative deal. Hayter aimed to begin filming in early 2002, though his first draft was not completed until July of that year. By May 2003, Hayter claimed that he had Moore's approval despite Moore's long-standing opposition to the adaptation. And by July 2003, producer Lloyd Levin praised Hayter's completed script, calling it a faithful and celebratory adaptation of the graphic novel. However, creative disagreements led Hayter and other producers to part ways with Universal, and by October 2003, Gordon and Levin explored moving the project to Revolution Studios. Plans were made to shoot in Prague, but the deal ultimately collapsed. And by July 2004, Paramount Pictures took over production and hired Darren Aronofsky to direct Hayter's script, and with Gordon and Levin continued as producers alongside Aronofsky's partner Eric Watson. Aronofsky eventually exited to focus on The Fountain, and Paramount replaced him with Paul Greengrass, targeting a summer 2006 release. At this time, Paddy Considine was reportedly in talks to play Rorschach, while Jude Law and Tom Cruise both expressed interest in portraying Ozymandias. Greengrass envisioned Joaquin Phoenix as Dan Dryberg and Hilary Swank as Laurie Jupiter. To promote the film, Paramount launched a teaser website featuring web boards and downloadable wallpaper, with concept art by Tristan Sand depicting Dr. Manhattan with exposed internal organs. It would be years until Warner Brothers officially resumed control of Watchmen, and the studio argued that Paramount had no legal claim to the rights due to unresolved reimbursement issues with Universal. After negotiations, it was agreed that Paramount would retain a 25% stake and hold international distribution, and impressed by Zack Snyder's work on 300, Warner Brothers approached him to direct Watchmen. And after deliberating for several weeks, Zack Snyder officially signed on in June 2006, with Alex writing the screenplay. Drawing from the strongest aspects of two of Hader's drafts, Tay's script restored the original Cold War era setting. While Warner Brothers accepted the 1980s backdrop, they were a little hesitant about Snyder's desired R rating. Snyder would also add an opening scene that was a title montage to establish the film's alternate history version of the United States. He retained an ending from one of Hader's drafts that streamlined the conspiracy, allowing more focus on character development. When Zack Snyder entered the picture, he aimed to match the comic's integral detail, including the numerous hidden references embedded in each panel. He treated the graphic novel as a literal storyboard, carrying it with him and annotating the pages, and would argue that his storyboards, not the script, were his primary guide. We should neglect the fact that Alan Moore did not want this to happen, and he made it known. When Fox first acquired the rights, Alan Moore was initially optimistic. In a 1987 comics interview, he recalled meeting Sam Hamm in Northampton and believed Hamm would respect the comic spirit. However, Hamm's script drastically changed the ending, killing Adrian Veidt and using time manipulation to undo John Ostran's radiation exposure, transporting the characters into an alternate reality. During Warner Brothers' early ownership, Moore reversed his stance entirely, insisting that the comic was inherently non-cinematic. He told Variety that he never believed Watchmen could be filmed and explained that it was designed to showcase what comics could do that films could not. In December 2001, Moore expanded on this view, arguing that comics should allow readers to move at their own pace and revisit earlier material, something film cannot replicate at 24 frames per second. His opposition hardened after the release of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen in 2003, leading him to donate any of the Watchmen film royalties to Dan Gibbons, the artist. Moore later said that Hader's script was the closest adaptation possible, though he still refused to see the finished film. He remarked that Watchmen was meant to be read comfortably, not watched. In November 2006, Snyder expressed hope of speaking with Moore, despite Moore having distanced himself from film adaptations after V for Vendetta. Moore agreed to remain uncredited, and with any earnings he gained from the films, he would give to Gibbons. In November 2006, Snyder expressed hope of speaking with Moore, despite Moore having distanced himself from film adaptations after V for Vendetta. Moore agreed to remain uncredited, with his earnings again going to Gibbons. On Snyder's part, he did publicly respect Moore's wishes, though Moore criticized Snyder's involvement, citing his dislike of 300 and calling the adaptation racist, homophobic, and intelligently shallow. But let's circle back to what makes this film ahead of its time. The idea of Watchmen as a whole was, what if superheroes existed in the real world? How would that affect politics, war, and even the social and economic welfare of the country? Well, this is what the graphic novel and the closely adapted film chose to explore through its diverse and flawed characters. With the brink of nuclear war hanging over the heads of many, culminating into a potential third world war, our protagonists are outlawed heroes in 1985 who are pulled out of forced retirement to investigate the murder of the comedian, a government-sponsored superhero, while dealing with their own personal and moral conflict. In a media filled with altruistic, costume-clad heroes, Watchmen showed us that our heroes, in quotations, could be selfish, detached, and burdened. And it brings me back to my initial statement. Yeah, we have the boys, but Watchmen's deconstruction of heroes were in a way that mirrors the heroes we all come to know and love over time. What if a supremely powerful being disassociates with being human? That's something we get with Dr. Manhattan. Could you imagine if Superman lost the only thing that made him human? These were things that Watchmen explores, and it's through the thoughts of the masked vigilante Rorschach, whose moral absolution shows no gray in a world that is morally corrupt in his eyes, do we get to see the unmasking of these heroes. This commentary on the superhero community was a refreshing take in terms of how readers could reinterpret their favorite superheroes. Fast forward to 2009 and Watchmen had been released, and reviews are mixed to say the least. with some stating that Moore was correct and that Watchmen was unfilmable, but it was still a stylish and decent adaptation. But going back to what they initially wanted to do, could you imagine what it would have looked like as an HBO series? But could you imagine what this would look like as a HBO series based on the original novel? Not the Watchmen series that we got several years ago, but rather in the same way that The Boys is depicted. How would this film been portrayed? Had this been released in a post-Avengers world, the subversion would have worked, as at the time that commentary was not even a thing yet in comics. But let me know what you all think in the comments below. Was Watchmen for its time? I'll be interested in hearing what you have to say. But I'm Anderson, and I'm out.